full tour right now, so I can start walking. I can't go in until 2:30. Give you some additional information you can't hear on the tour because we don't have time. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Tom, and I have been caving, guiding here actually for 17 years. And we're going to go into the Fairy Cave, and what I find on both of my tours, either here or down below, very few people ask questions. And I welcome questions. So feel free, if you can remember my name, or just raise your hand or just shout out. I'd love to help you learn some more information about the cave if I haven't covered it. Okay. Going into the cave this year, we have a new rule that we've never had before, and that is masks must be covering the nose and mouth at all times while we're there. And try to practice social distancing all day in the Fairy Cave. It's almost impossible. The other cave is much bigger. This one has got more past 24. We'll do our best. That's why we're limiting to 16. The state said we can no longer take 25 in like we used to. They almost cut us in half, actually. The cave itself was discovered by a non-caver. It was discovered by an attorney back in the 1895. His name was C.W. Darrow, and he had found out as an attorney that the top 80 acres of this mountain was being offered free of charge by the federal government if you homesteaded it by building a cabin and living here for 6 years. Wow. Well, he actually lived up here for more than 20 years, and he did build a cabin, obviously. And the reason he gave up his practice was so many people had become very wealthy mining silver in Idaho Springs, Aspen, Leadville, all around here. He assumed he could do the same thing. So that's why he was up here. And one day, and you cannot see it under the tent here, but as you come out from under, you will see it. There's a sign up there that says original cave entrance. And one day while he was up there prospecting, he heard a whistling sound. Some cold air was coming out through the earth. And other caves had been found around here, so he thought he might have found a cave. So he started digging with his pickaxe, and he created the opening that has now been closed up, and we'll go through another door, which is easier to go in. And once he got inside, he had this wonderful idea to get even richer and take care of all the tourists who would want to see the cave. And he charged 50 cents. Doesn't sound like much money to us today, but back then the average wage was 75 cents to $1 for an entire day of work. So if you go in our restaurant today, on either side of the fireplace is a picture taken 123 years ago of our guests at that time. Ladies were in long dresses, very elegant dresses. Men were in suits and ties and vests. These were very wealthy people, the only people who could afford to come to the cave. And I find it interesting that there was no tram. The only way to get up here is walk. Wow. So you're in that kind of close on a warm day. And we're about 1,400 foot elevation change from town, and about 2,000 feet diagonal distance to get up here. So they had to walk that to get up here, and then crawl through the hole in the ground. And there's a very steep slope after you go through the hole. And then when you left, you had to crawl back up and out. And then you had to walk all the way back down to town. They only saw half of the cave. Up until 8 years ago, that was our cave tour. We continued with it from what he had. And then because we got so busy up here, we decided to open up an additional area. It took us 3 years of mining and allowed us to now no longer crawl from a room to a room. We now can walk from the room to a room. So the second half is virtually untouched only from the last 8 years. And I tell you that because Mr. Darrow had 16 children, and he continued to look for silver, but he always left his wife and children living in town. He lived up here alone. I have my own opinion as to why he would have done that. His claim was that he was protecting the cave in his interest. But he did put a couple of his teenagers to work during the cave tours. He continued to look for silver, never ever found any. And unfortunately, when World War I started, there was no more guests anymore. So he had no way to make money, and he actually just walked away. Took his whole family, moved to Denver, and he never closed up the opening. For 45 years, anyone that knew this cave was here could come in and do anything they wanted to. Unfortunately, some people weren't just exploring. There was a lot of vandalism, evidence of a lot of parties held in there, a lot of graffiti. We fixed the graffiti. We fixed all the trash and everything. But the one thing we could not fix is all the stalactites and stalagmites that had been taken as souvenirs. They will be on the second half of the tour, the last 20 minutes, but they will not be on the first. I'll just give you that fair warning ahead of time. So we are inside of Iron Mountain right now, and inside the Fairy Cave. And as I mentioned, outside, discovered in 1895 and abandoned in 1917. That's when all the damage occurred. If you look here, for example, but there's many other places in this room, this is about a stalactite 4 inches in diameter. Probably went right down to the floor, would be my guess, and has been taken. And in Colorado, it takes well over 1,000 years to create 1 cubic inch of formation. So you can imagine how many eons it took to create that. There's just no way that we're going to be able to put that back. Now, when the cave was abandoned in 1959, a professional caver came in here, and he liked what he saw here, and he actually went to the courthouse to try to find out who owned the property. And it was the children by that time, and so the cave and the property was 16 children ownership. And Mr. Preble offered each one of them $1,000. So if you do the math, that's 16,000, and they took it. So he bought everything here, plus 80 acres, for $16,000 in 1959.
Wow.
His plan was to open the cave system again to the public. So he closed up the original entry, which we'll see better when we leave today, and he blasted in the door that we walked through today, and ran out of money and never went any further. So for the next 40 years, this was the playground for him and his caving buddies, all locked up and preserved, which was good for us. So I kind of think of this as the original man cave, if you will. And while he was here, on one of his exploring journeys with his buddies, he went through a passage which is way back here. He walked by it, you probably didn't notice it, but about a 30-minute crawl from there, he discovered a crack, a fissure in the mountain, which would have been created with the uplift of the Rockies millions of years ago. And as the mountain cooled off, it cracked internally. And these fissures, as we call them, are generally about 20 inches wide or so, and they usually go down straight or diagonal, and usually dead end. This one looked like a dead end, went straight down. Today we know it's 32 feet long, and his buddies put a rope around him, and he started his way down, and halfway down it narrowed to 8.5 inches for 1 vertical foot. I've been a caver all my life, since 1959 anyway, and I don't do that because you got to come back out, and gravity's helping you go down. But he squeezed himself through that narrow spot. It did open back up a little bit, and when he got down to the bottom, it was curved just like a J, which is why we call it jam crack today. And the J took him into the 2nd largest room ever found in Colorado. So now for $16,000, he owns 2 caves and the 2nd largest room in Colorado, 250 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 65 feet tall. He named that room the barn, and the barn is the very first room that you go into on the next tour, the Kings Road tour. Has any of you been on that tour yet?
Mm-hmm.
We did.
Okay. Your guide should have showed you where he came out. But,
Yeah.
And they're doing their job, right? And
Pretty cool.
Did
actually,
he ever widen it?
pardon?
Did he ever widen it?
No. So you lead me to my next point.
Oh,
For the
sorry.
next 40 years, very few people, just a handful, were brave enough and skinny enough to go down and see that room. And of course, Kings Row is the 2nd room after that he found also, which you'll see when you get down there. We do a light show, which is pretty spectacular. And it wasn't until 1999, 40 years later, when the current owners, who paid $1 million to Peter Preble, bought 2 caves and the land here. And that's Steve and Jeannie Beckley. They're the private owners in the park. And they're both cavers. They wanted to open up the caves to the public, and they did. in 1999. But it took a 6-month journey with a mining company from Idaho Springs to build a tunnel to go into that room easy instead of trying to go through that shaft. Now we've had about 1.8 million people have seen that cave. So we opened up May 31st, 1999, and we brought you by van for the first 4 years. There was no other way up here but bringing up a road, and stayed open about 8 months of the year, and then the snow would keep us from opening. And by the way, I've lived here for 20 years since I retired back in 2000, and it's usually this week as we get our first major snowfall, and I understand we're going to have snow on Monday. But believe it or not, we had snow here 1 month ago yesterday, 6 inches, and that's the earliest we've ever had snow in Glenwood Springs. But it's coming. We expect it. And of course, that's what keeps the cave alive, because that snow line's on top of the mountain, and my gravity starts seeping through, picks up all kinds of bacteria from decaying animals and plants, and forms carbon dioxide and carbonic acid, and that's how the cave is formed. So it's a perpetual motion machine, if you will. And when you dissolve the limestone, it starts to drip and creates stalactites. Those are the ones that look like icicles hanging from the ceiling, and they're very common in a cave. What is not so common is what grows from the floor up, because there normally isn't a floor. This is man-made. We put this in so you could walk. If we had not, it would be you'd be walking on stuff like that. So the lighting and the floor are new, and quite frankly, what happens when it drips down, you normally get what's called flow snow. It just flows all over the place, and I'll show you some good examples at our next stop. So you might get 50 stalactites, 1 stalagmite. They're quite rare. A lot of people have a hard time differentiating between the two, and there's a lot of different ways that I've heard. But the way I learned on my very first cave tour, I was 10 years old, 1955, Fairy Cavern in New York State. I'll never forget the tour guide saying, when those nasty mites crawl up your legs, your tights will go down. So an easy way to remember if you're on Jeopardy, just remember Tom told you that, okay? So we're going to go forward now, because there's lots more to see, but one last thing to tell you about. There was never a plan for a park here. But in 2003, a tram was added. And instead of 10 people in a van, we could bring 300 people per hour. And all of a sudden, people were waiting 3 and 4 hours to take a cave tour with nothing to do up here. And that's when it was decided to put in a first ride, which is the Alpine Coaster, still our most popular ride here today. That's when I joined the organization. I'd been retired for a few years and was getting bored, and as a caver, this seemed like a logical place to come. And since my house does not have air conditioning, this clinched the deal, actually. It's 52 degrees in here every single day of the year. It never changes. So, my wife is the receptionist. She's been here for 17 years also, and she gets 75 degrees in the office, but I get the best in here.
Probably during the day she hides down there.
What'd you have, Rick?
Yeah, it looks like there was some up there that broke off.
So we are in the internal tower. It goes up 70 feet. Not an opening up there. There's no sun coming through. That's an actual light up there. And you'll see a lot of dark spots everywhere. These are all tree roots because it's 65% humidity in the cave right now. In fact, look over here. We've got some tree roots that are truly large that have come down. And that's actually, nature has realized this is a good place to find moisture when it's 10 to 20% outside all the time. And if you look behind me here, you can see a lot of damage that has been done. A lot of stalactites and stalagmites have been taken and broken off. And this is the best example, as well as here, of what I talked about earlier, flowstone. When they drip, because it wasn't flat here, it just flowed all over the place, covered up the coral pretty much over to here and right over to here. And this coral is the first thing that actually is developed in the cave in the earliest life. And the cave has been estimated by geologists about 1.6 million years old. So if that is, the coral is the earliest, then it's been covered over one drip at a time, one speck of mineral, actually to the depth of my flashlight. So they've estimated this formation to be about 1 million years old. It's been around for a while. And you'll notice up here, it was flat enough just at the top that we did get some stalagmites. And they, of course, they've been broken off also. Now, first 2 years, tours were done here by candlelight by his children. And then in 1897, Mr. Darrow put electric lights in the cave. We were the second cave in the entire United States to be electrified. The Fairy Caverns in Virginia was the very first. Now, of course, Virginia was a lot more civilized than we were here in the Wild West in 1897. And I think it would have been pretty neat to crawl through that hole in the ground and see electric lights at that time. And it was neat enough that the Vandals, when they were in here, they liked it, they took it all out. We do have evidence it was here. If you look right above us here, we have a piece of wood sticking out. This is where the wires would have been hung. There's about 10 of these left, but don't look for the same thing. Every one is unique. That piece of wood that he found that he jammed into cracks. The picture that I actually talked about earlier that's on the right side of the fireplace was taken in this room 123 years ago. A photographer standing just about where I am. Two ladies over here in their long dresses, and you can see coming out of that passage that we just walked through, some wires coming out, and right about here hanging down is a clear glass light bulb. So we have visual evidence for sure that it was here. And we actually have replicated that for about 400 feet in the new section of the cave, which we'll see later. It's called Knob and Tube. The bulbs that we're using are replicas of bulbs that would have existed in 1900. It lights up the cave a lot better than I anticipated. Not as good as our LEDs, but much better. Now, the cave is called the Fairy Cave, and it got its name because when Mr. Darrow brought his oldest daughter here for the first time to see this room, this beautiful big room, of course she was holding a candle, and at that time the walls were much wetter, and flickering off the walls and ceiling, she told her dad she saw fairies dancing. And that's how we got the name, which we kept, of course, till today. Now, of course, he was looking for gold and silver, so I'm going to take you now through a tunnel, 189 feet long, that was built, of course, for the purpose of finding gold and silver. Of course, that didn't occur, but he broke out through the side of the mountain, and there's a great picture spot, which we're going to go to now. This is the only time in the tour that I will be behind everybody, so please, when you get out there, don't wait for me. So take pictures because our time is limited out there, okay? I'll get you started and then I'll be following. Well, it's operating. If you look straight up, this is our canyon flyer. This is a ride that takes you out into the canyon, but not as severe a ride as the swing that might happen a little bit. Mr. Darrow, I guess when you come out this far, this would have been the end of the tour right here. No problem. We put this here in 1999, so we just kind of looked over the edge. The distance to the highway is 1,400 feet. That's the same distance that the guests had to walk up here to see the cave tour back in the 1890s. Of course, they couldn't do it here, it's pretty steep, but they pretty much walked up the same typical route that the tram line is running today. I hear the swing, and it's on swing number 1. On the 4th swing, we get the best streams, and the goes the highest if you want to take a picture. That's number 3. Next one will be higher. If you look down below to the right, that is a little town of Glenwood Springs, and around the corner from the spring is where you came up today. Down below is the Colorado River, Interstate 70, and railroad tracks put in here in 1885. Still used daily by coal trains, also the Amtrak California Jumper running from Chicago to San Francisco and back comes through here now every other day. It used to come through here twice a day, but they cut back on the number of trips because of the low passengers.
What river did you say?
That is the Colorado. Up until 1920, it had a different name. It was the Grand River. But since the headwaters for the Colorado River are about 120 miles north of here, and it goes all the way to California, it was decided that this should be renamed the Colorado because this is where it starts. And if you look on top of that mountain where those towers are, those cell towers today, in 1910, Walter Devereux, who built the Hotel Colorado, a very wealthy man, to give back to the city of Glenwood, he built an observatory and a telescope up there so everyone would have an opportunity to see Halley's Comet that year. The building was made of wood, unfortunately, and years later struck by lightning and destroyed. Foundation is still up there. I wouldn't go up there just to look at the foundation, but there is a trail called the Boy Scout Trail. You can see the last third of it right here. Beautiful view from up there. And straight out beyond this mountain is Mount Sopris, a little less than 13,000 feet tall. Twin Peaks, still has snow in between the peaks from last winter. That's our usual guide as to how much snow we had. By this time of the year, it's usually gone, but there's still some up there. And 2 weeks ago, you couldn't even see this from here because of all the fires in the canyon here. A lot of people think that was a volcano, but it never erupted. If you could see it in its entirety, it really looks kind of like Mount Fuji in Japan.
Where were all the fires? Is that with everything closed?
They came right up behind our park,
Okay.
and then all the way to the other end of the canyon. You can look over here and see all the burn. There's some spots that didn't burn, but many that did. We're now going to turn around, go back through the tunnel here, and we're going to go into the new section, which was only crawlable before. It used to take us 2 hours to crawl what we're going to do now by walking in 20 minutes. And I need to ask a favor, whoever is the last person following behind me, to shut the door to the cave. And it's not the door that's right here by the metal grate. That one stays open all day, but the other one needs to be closed. If we don't, the air is coming in right now, the pressure is rising, and it brings the smoke into the cave. So please follow. This was the home from here on of our wild tour, which is a maximum of 8 people, reservation only. And we started by giving you all the proper equipment. And you started up that passageway outside the doorway here, which was not lit up, nor were there any lights in here from here on. But you came into this room through what's called the rabbit hole. 18 inches wide and 18 inches long. If you could get through there, the tour never got any smaller. And actually, anyone with a 42-inch rib cage, which is me, can do those tours. Anything over that, you might get stuck. But 42 will work out just fine. Not saying it's not tight, but you can do it. Once you came into this room with your headlamp, you would crawl and then stand up for a while because it was high ceiling. But the floor used to be way up here. And once you walked across to about this point, you'd have to get down and you crawled out through an opening about that size there. Now we've dug this all out. We've taken out over 100 ton of rock between now and when we finish today. That all came back this way, went out through the tunnel over the hillside. This room is called the Rhino Room because of this formation right above here. And when I came in here for the very first time, this room looked so much different because of the lighting, the fact that the floor had been taken down considerably. This is what caught my eye over here. It used to look like this, and then when they were blasting in here, obviously this piece had kind of sheared off. And you're seeing the dissolved limestone, the calcium carbonate, that had gone into cracks in the rock and solidified. Now you're seeing a cross section. I thought it was a neat picture, but I didn't see anything special. But on my very first tour, 8 years ago, I had an expectant mom, and she immediately said, "There's my baby's sonogram." Once it's pointed out, I think most people can see that. And I told that story for the last 7 years. And last October, on one of my tours, a gentleman said to me, "What about the twin?" I never saw this myself. There's another child looking that direction, better developed. There's the forehead right there. There's the eye, the nose, the chin, maybe a stomach, if you will. Certainly some ears. And just amazes me that I did not see that looking at this specifically and showing it for 7 years. But it's basically happens to me a lot. People point out things that even though I've been through here thousands and thousands of times, stuff that I just have never actually seen. If you were here 123 years ago, this is what you would have seen where we just came from, the Eternal Tower and all the other rooms. I knew they were going to attempt to do this, replicate the lighting, but I never anticipated it would look this good. I thought it would be much duller. So I want you to remember this. This is what guests saw in 1897. They saw the ceiling, they saw a lot of the cave, because around the corner, we're going to shut the lights off and I'm going to show you how the candles appeared. That's significantly nowhere near as good. And this is the kind of wiring that would have been in houses from the 1890s to the early 1930s. Wire that wasn't in the wall like we have today, but on the wall. It's called knob and tube, the tube being the wire, the knob being the porcelain insulator. And the only reason it was high on the wall was because it was uninsulated wire, so to keep you away from it and getting shocked. But when we put it in here, the county code 8 years ago wouldn't allow us to put in uninsulated wire. So we've replicated as well as we could. This is your first chance right here to see some stalactites and stalagmites that have never been disturbed or touched. And right here we have some very nice cave bacon. As you follow me, take a look up in here.
It's so cool. You see the cave bacon?
It looks like bacon.
We step back into this room here.
It's way bigger than I thought it would be.
So those formations that are like up there, kind of smooth, roundish color, were those stalactites coming down at all, or what? Okay.
No, nothing has been damaged in here.
Okay.
You'll see some stalactites and stalagmites back here,
Okay.
but what's up here has never been touched or damaged. What you're seeing is just some unique formations. That's why we stop here to take pictures, because of the iron and the gypsum. You get some unique looks and colors, but everything up there is just the way nature created it. Now, this room is called the register room. It would have taken us an hour to crawl here. We just did it in 10 minutes walking, and the tour is 2 hours, so we would stop here and just use our headlamps to take some pictures and take a little breather. But there was a book back in the corner here called the register, where we put our name, where we're from, and what day we were crawling here. And of course, we're not crawling anymore. That's in a new location, so we've moved that book. The entire new wild tour, which we've been doing for 7 years now, but we couldn't do it this year because of pandemic, is down below us. And still a 2-hour tour. And the entrance to that tour, and folks, you got to come over here to be able to see this better. You have to go down through here.
Right here and then down, that's where they start.
Okay. And by the way, we learned to crawl as a child, young child, and we cavers do the same thing. We crawl head face forward, but not here. You cannot go down here face forward. And the interesting thing is, of all the people that I've ever taken on these tours, and I did it up until about 3 years ago, and then my knees just said twice a day is not something I want to do anymore. I still cave, but it does wear you out, especially with you got people who have never done it before. And they're going to have to go down here backwards. And I will go first, show them how to do it. If you try to go head first, you're going to tumble down, probably hurt yourself. Also, if you really hold yourself back and try to go down slow, you're going to get dizzy because the blood is going to be rushing to your head. So you really have to go down feet first. So I will go down through here and show them how to do it. The interesting thing is, of course, you're used to having your headlamp showing you where to go. Well, the headlamp's going to be shining up here, not behind you. And when you go down through there, I don't know how many of you touched that cave coral outside. It's pretty sharp. And the uniform that we provide you, the knee pads, elbow pads, and everything, when you go down, regardless of which way you go down, it's going to tug. The coral's going to catch and pull things and tug them off, which is why we've named that passage the striptease. Mm-hmm. Halfway up the stairs, there is another big spot that you want to stop.
The ones that go down are called stalactites. Okay. The ones that go from the bottom up are called stalagmites. Yours, right? Looks like we could go down. Yeah, that's a pool.
Plus you got the actual one.
And there's a lot more stuff down here that a lot of people miss because they're focusing on this stuff.
What was that rope that was hanging down right back there?
That is the escape route. Because once you start and crawl down, there's no way you can come back out if you're claustrophobic. It's your first introduction to the cave. And there's a big room down below, and that cable is connected to the room. It's a much easier way to come back out.
Climbing up that rope.
Yeah, it's actually at an angle like this for the most part. Trying to go up that steep slope is impossible.
Wow.
And it happens every once in a while. Someone will get claustrophobic and they just can't do it.
What was the floor like when people were coming in here and partying and breaking off stalagmites and stuff?
Hard to describe. It's just very bumpy. You know,
Because it would have been nothing paved or anything.
No,
any of this
no,
stuff,
it,
right?
hard to show you that here, but it would have looked in many places, there's just nothing to show you here. It's this room really filled in nicely. In most cases, there's just a lot of stuff. It'd be like climbing over lots of rocks. So it wouldn't have been easy to get through here. What'd you think of the tour, folks?
Pretty cool.
Keep in mind that what you just saw in terms of formations were all taken from the first half of the tour, which is unfortunate because we can't put them back. Most people that I've had questions from is expecting to actually the question is, why don't I see more stalactites or stalagmites? Well, we know half of them were taken, but most caves that I've been in, you don't find stalactites and stalagmites every foot of the way. It's where there's a lot of moisture that can come down through cracks in the mountain, like where we were back there. Some have more, but like our lower cavern, like the King's Row, will blow your mind away because it's just, there's lots of formations in that room, much more than you normally expect to see. So, we have one more room that we're going to look at, and that's called the bedroom. please shut that door on and off. This is called the bedroom because this is where the cavers for many years would store the gear while caving and actually sleeping here. It's 52 degrees in the cave every day of the year. It never changes. And of course, once you're inside here, you have no idea what's going on outside. It could be windy, could be storming, could be snow, rain, you don't know. So in here, it's a pretty safe place to sleep, and if you are in here, you don't have to worry about the bears and mountain lions that we have around here also. So it's a good place to be. But no longer is it used for that. It's now a classroom. That's when you see the chairs back over here. In the month of May, typically we have about 6,000 students here on field trips. Of course, that didn't happen this year. School was closed. But the owner generously gives a half-price ticket to teachers to bring students here at their end of their school year. They get all the rides. They get both cave tours. But prior to doing that, they spend an hour in the room here with a retired scientist, science teacher actually, that we have on staff. And he teaches them for an hour the origin and the geology information of the cave. So it gives them a good education before they go play. But what a wonderful thing to do at the end of the school year. Back in the 50s when last day of school, I think we got to go out on the playground, and that was about it. This would have been a much nicer place to go. What is so heartwarming to me anymore, being here as long as I have, is that now I'm starting to have parents here with little toddlers, and the parents were here at the end of their school year on tours, and now they've gone on and got married and had their own children, and they're bringing them back. So that's kind of neat for me. So we're about ready to leave, and as we come up to the door, make sure you look up to the left. You'll see some metal bars, and that's the original opening. And of course, they had to come down a pretty steep slope to get to the floor where we walked in. As you exit, many of you had backpacks and beverages and stuff like that. Make sure you pick them up.
This is when the person found the cave, Jordan, over 100 years ago. This is where they came